Okay, so today we're diving right into the thick of it. With this rapidly escalating situation in the Middle East,
Yeah.
we're talking about Iran launching ballistic missiles at Israel earlier today.
Right.
And, with this ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict already causing so much tension, this just adds like a whole other layer of chaos to the region.
Yeah.
And to help us make sense of it all, we have an expert with us who's been watching these events super closely. So what are the main things we need to know about this missile attack?
Well, the big news is this. Iran fired about, roughly 200 ballistic missiles at targets inside Israel.
Wow.
This isn't some random attack either. It's a direct response to the killing of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, last week.
Right.
And that event really shook things up in the region.
Yeah, this is a big deal. I mean, Iran directly attacking Israel like this is not something you see every day.
Exactly. It's a major escalation. And on top of that, the U.S. is directly involved.
Oh, how so?
Well, President Biden personally authorized the U.S. military to help Israel shoot down those missiles.
Really?
Yeah, and we're talking U.S. Navy destroyers, the ones stationed in the eastern Mediterranean, actually firing interceptor missiles to neutralize those Iranian missiles.
Hold on, U.S. ships actually fired on Iranian missiles. That could easily turn into a much bigger conflict, couldn't it?
Absolutely. This is why everyone's so on edge right now. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and this thing could spiral way out of control. It's a really tense situation.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how carefully the Biden administration is choosing their words. Well, they're calling this Iranian attack defeated and ineffective. Like they're trying to downplay it, probably to avoid making things worse.
It sounds like everyone's walking on eggshells right now. But how did we even get to this point? This Iranian attack, it didn't just come out of nowhere, right?
No, not at all.
What's the backstory here?
Well, the tension between Iran and Israel has been simmering for decades,
Mm-hmm.
fueled by this complex mix of political, religious, and ideological differences.
Right.
And then the killing of Nasrallah, who was a central figure in Hezbollah, well, that was a major turning point.
Mm-hmm.
Hezbollah has deep ties to Iran and has fought numerous conflicts with Israel over the years. So.
Okay, so Iran is retaliating for the death of Nasrallah, the leader of a group that has a history of conflict with Israel, and now the U.S. is directly involved. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, and this is where the stakes get incredibly high.
Right, because the U.S. has this long-standing alliance with Israel, so their involvement, it's not completely unexpected, but it definitely heats things up and puts the U.S. in a tough spot.
Yeah.
It's like they're walking a diplomatic tightrope. They have to support Israel, their ally, but doing so could easily spark a larger conflict in an already volatile region.
You got it. And the potential fallout from a wider conflict like that is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about disruptions to global oil supplies, a massive humanitarian crisis, and this risk of the conflict spreading to other countries in the Middle East. It's a delicate balancing act with enormous consequences.
So how is the U.S. trying to manage this whole situation? I keep hearing about all this back-channel diplomacy going on. What does that even mean?
Well, it's a lot of behind-the-scenes communication between high-ranking officials. Think secure phone calls, secret meetings, messages passed through intermediaries.
Oh, okay.
The goal is to open up those lines of communication, try to de-escalate the situation, and find solutions that don't involve more military action.
So like a high-stakes game of telephone.
Kinda, yeah. But it's good to know those conversations are happening because this can't be good for international relations, especially with elections coming up.
You're right about that. This whole thing just adds another layer of complexity to what's already a very intense political climate.
Yeah, the elections definitely add another layer to all this. This situation puts even more pressure on the president.
So...
Well, domestically, he's going to be judged on how he handles this crisis.
Yeah.
Some people are going to want him to take a tougher stance, maybe even military action, while others are going to urge restraint.
Right.
And then on the international stage, the U.S. has to walk this fine line between being a peacemaker and standing strong with his allies. It's a tough balance. And this whole situation, it could really impact U.S. foreign policy for years to come.
It sounds like we're talking about potential consequences that reach far beyond the Middle East.
Absolutely.
But before we get into that, I want to go back to Israel for a sec. They were directly attacked, so they must be under a lot of pressure to retaliate.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure on the Israeli government to respond with force is huge. But they have to be careful. A measured response is crucial right now.
Do you think so?
Yeah. Some analysts are saying Israel might go with targeted airstrikes.
Oh.
Yeah, on Iranian military facilities. Kind of like what they did in 2021 when they hit those Iranian nuclear sites.
Right.
Those kinds of surgical strikes, they're still forceful, but they're seen as a more measured response.
I guess.
Definitely more measured than, say, a ground invasion of Lebanon, which would probably make things a whole lot worse.
Yeah, that would not be good. So it's a tough call for Israel trying to balance domestic pressure with the need to avoid a wider war.
Yeah.
It shows just how complicated this situation really is. But let's say, just hypothetically, that things do spiral out of control. What are the experts saying about the potential fallout if this escalates?
Well, one of the biggest impacts would be on the global economy, especially energy.
How so?
Well, Iran could easily disrupt shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, that's a major oil route.
Exactly. A huge chunk of the world's oil supply goes through there.
Right.
If Iran messes with that, oil prices are going to skyrocket, causing chaos far beyond the Middle East.
It would be like the oil shocks of the 1970s all over again.
Exactly. Soaring energy costs would affect everything like transportation, consumer goods, you name it.
So the economic consequences could be enormous. But what about the human cost? I mean, this is a region already struggling with so much conflict and instability.
And that's the thing. This situation has the potential to create a humanitarian crisis on a massive scale.
Really?
Oh, yeah. A wider conflict would mean massive displacement of people, with civilians caught in the middle. And we can't rule out the possibility of this spilling over into neighboring countries either.
Oh, like a domino effect.
Exactly. You could see other countries getting pulled into the conflict, destabilizing the entire region. And this isn't just some far-fetched idea. It's a very real and very scary possibility.
That's a sobering thought. So, with all that in mind, what are the experts saying about how this might play out? What are the possible scenarios?
Well, nobody can predict the future, for sure. But there are a few possibilities that experts are considering.
Okay, like what?
The best-case scenario is that cooler heads prevail and diplomacy wins out.
So those back-channel discussions actually work.
Right, maybe they lead to de-escalation. Both sides agree to back down and find a peaceful solution.
Let's hope so. But what if that doesn't happen? What are the other possibilities?
Well, another scenario is that you have this prolonged period of low-intensity conflict.
I'd like a stalemate.
Sort of. Both sides exchange blows, but they avoid an all-out war. Think cyber attacks, proxy wars, maybe even limited military strikes.
So a dangerous game of chicken.
Exactly. Not ideal, but it's a possibility we have to consider.
And then there's the worst-case scenario.
Right, the one nobody wants to talk about.
A full-blown regional war.
Yeah, and potentially with the U.S. and maybe other world powers getting dragged into it too.
This is what everyone's trying to avoid.
Absolutely. That's the nightmare scenario. It would be devastating for the region and the whole world.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. This is such a complex situation with so many moving parts, and it's hard to know what's going to happen.
It really highlights the importance of staying informed, you know?
Yeah.
We need to pay attention to what's happening, think critically about the different perspectives, and have these important conversations about these really complex issues.
Because this isn't just about things happening far away.
Right. It's about understanding how interconnected our world is and what the consequences might be for all of us.
Well said. So for our listeners who are just tuning in and trying to catch up, what are the key takeaways from our discussion today?
Well, I think the main takeaway is this. Things are changing by the minute. What started as a regional conflict has blown up, dragging in global superpowers and showing just how fragile things are in the world today.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that events on the other side of the world can have a ripple effect that reaches all of us.
Absolutely, and it shows why it's so important to really be informed. You know, we need to follow these events closely, consider different points of view, and have those tough conversations about these complicated issues.
Because this isn't just about headlines, it's about understanding the forces that shape our world and how those forces can impact our future.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a real eye-opener. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. This situation is far from over, so I'm sure we'll be discussing this again soon as things develop.
Definitely.
And for our listeners, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll leave you with this. In a world where everything's connected, how do we navigate the complex world of international relations and help create a more peaceful world? It's something to think about as we move forward.